And welcome back, guys, to another alternative Reforged Changelog. Today we're going to take you through the 4 Western Kingdoms of Men. So we're going to start with Dol Amroth here, because they being in arguably the weakest position among the 4 Western Kingdoms of Men and the normal Third Age Reforged, they got the most in the way of changes. So, first of all, we'll start with the lower tier units, and we'll kind of work our way up to the higher tier units that receive changes. So other than the name change, all units that were named Dora Nurnal are now changed to receive the name change to be known as Belfalas, and then whatever type of unit they are. So in this case, the Dora Nurnal swordsman became the Belfalas swordsman. Otherwise, the only things that may have changed, their shield might have gone up a point or two. They have more men in their unit now, and the recruitment cost went down by about 50 florins. So just relatively minor tweaks, but it'll give Dol Amroth more cheap infantry to pad out their lines. Yeah, that's really them. They are the only, by the way, they are the only one of the Belfalas units that cannot receive an armor upgrade at this point. So bear that in mind. Next are the Belfalas pikemen. They, other than the name change, haven't really changed in any other way, I don't think. Their armor, they can still receive an armor upgrade, and that comes with the aesthetic changes you're used to in normal Reforged. And the only thing that may have changed was their defensive skill. I could be wrong about that, though. Their cost is still the same. Basically, it's really just the name change. It's the big thing for them. Belfalas Marines. Belfalas Marines haven't changed too much. Their cost is still the same. You still get the same number of them before the red limit. And that's been true of the other units I've just talked about as well. The big change here with the Belfalas Marines is that once they're out of ammo with their javelins, they pull out axes that are armor piercing. And their shield value, I think, may have gone up by 1 or 2 points. So they become dependable line-holding troops once they're done with their javelin attacks. Excuse me. Their javelins, as well, are no longer body-piercing. They are only armor-piercing. And then that will be true of most javelin units in the same tier as the Belfalas Marines. And Marine units that are wielding an axe or mace are really going to be the only ones that gain the armor piercing with their melee attacks. If it's a sword, it will stay as it is. That's kind of the general rule of thumb for the expansion, the alternative expansion for Reforged. Next we have the Belfalas Archers. These guys haven't really changed a whole lot. The big things really that have changed, so they can still take the armor upgrade, but the big thing that's changed is their missile attack is now 4, where it was 5 before. So these will perform the same role as Gondor Archers, really. They're not... actually, I think their melee stats may have gone down a little bit as well. If they did, it's only been by a point. So yeah, these are your lowest tier of archers, but being a Western Kingdom of Men, they're still going to be reliable. So they're going to be better armored. They'll survive in melee a little bit longer. They can still place stakes, and their morale is going to be a bit more dependable than, say, the Wildman nations or the Orc factions. And of course, they received the name change as well. Cost is the same. The armor upgrade with the aesthetic change is the same. The ammo supply is the same. Everything else is the same except their missile text down, name change, and maybe the melee text down a little bit too. And then the final one in this tier, anyway, are the Tier There Marksmen. Now, these guys are... they actually got a little bit worse in this compared to normal Reforged. Their melee attack stayed the same. The number of men in their unit stayed the same. Their ammo supply, I think, dropped a little bit. I think it's at 15 now. It's either 15 or 18. I can't remember which. All their defensive stats stayed the same. Their cost stayed the same, but their missile attack, I think, may have gone down. It didn't go up for sure. There's a chance it could have stayed the same, but for sure their ammo supply went down a little bit. But they're still dependable marksmen tier archers. They're just not going to be as good as the other Kingdoms of Men, in particular Gondor's marksmen. But I still think they're good enough to be worth taking. And so we'll move on to the next tier, and the reason, this will explain why the other archers that people are used to using in Reforged have gotten a little bit worse, and that's because Dol Amroth have a new archer unit. These are the Parathil Bowguard. Now the Parathil Bowguard come in the same numbers as the Tier There Marksmen, and for only 100 more florins, you get a much better missile attack with fire-trained arrows. That's the same ammo type that the Loki Narim use for Rune. And the changes I've made to that particular ammunition type are that it does area damage as opposed to just damage to a single model. And in addition to the aesthetic of having flaming arrows, they also get true flaming arrows that do morale damage. Otherwise, they have the same melee stats, approximately, as the Tier There Marksmen. Let's take a look at their defensive stats are a little bit less, but their missile attack is so much better that I think that these guys are just all around the better bet for you. And that's actually 5-3 versus 8. Okay, so yeah, they don't get as much of a charge bonus either. But the disparity in the missile attack is so much so. And they do have 3 less, I think, in their ammo supply. I think their ammo supply is 15, whereas the Tier There Marksman is 18. The Parathil Bowguard have at least the same range as the marksman as well. So I would highly suggest the Parathil Bowguard if you're taking if you want to play with an archer heavy force with a Dol Amroth army. Parathil Bowguard, you can't really go wrong with them. Note that they do not wield two-handed swords like the champions do, nor do they cause fear. So they're not the melee monsters that the Parathil champions are. So don't think that. But they are very reliable archers. So move on here to the Dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan. These guys really didn't change a whole lot from normal Reforged. The main thing for them is they now have a larger unit size for the same cost. So they got a little bit better. Because I think Dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan, they really needed help from normal Reforged. Their unit size was just too small, and while they have good melee stats, they're nothing like the, say, like the Dismounted Knights of Innuminos, for example, or the, as we'll come to them, the now revamped Wardens of the White Tower that Gondor have. That unit too also needed help, and they got it. So we'll see them here in a minute once we're done with Dol Amroth. But yeah, their melee stats I'm pretty sure are identical as they were before. Their defensive stats are really strong, 32 total defense, pretty evenly wrapped up in amongst all 3 types of defense. The really good shield value, So I think that may have gone up a little bit too. So yeah, these guys got objectively better for no change in the cost. So I highly recommend you get them. They still have their morale buff too, I believe. I don't know if it says that here, but I'm pretty sure they still have their morale buff. And even if I did get rid of that, I think that the increase in the other changes made make them as worth it as they were before to take them, if not more so, because their morale buff before really wasn't particularly impressive. So losing it wouldn't have been that much of a deal. But I think they still have it. I'll have to check though. Next we come to the dismounted Iron Swan captains. This is the first of the newer units of the Tolfalos Iron Swan units that Dol Amroth have. So you look at these guys, and you'll notice they're wielding a two-handed greatsword, like a claymore or Zweihander of some sort. And for those of you keeping score at home, that would make this the fourth two-handed swordmaster unit in Dol Amroth's roster. However, you don't want to treat these guys like a two-handed swordmaster. They've been spec'd out to be more like Axemen of Lasarnik. So their armor piercing and their melee skill is not anywhere near as good. They are better than Axemen of Lasarnik, objectively better. They have better armor. They have very good armor, in fact. They have a really good defensive skill, with a total defense of 21, which is really solid. Though they don't have a shield value of any kind because they don't have a shield. So they will be ripped apart by armor-piercing arrows or crossbows, that sort of thing. They have an attack of 11, which is exactly identical to the Axemen of Lasarnik, which is kind of how they were built around. Charge bonus of 5, which is pretty mediocre for a shock infantry unit of their type. They have the same number in their unit as Axemen of Lasarnik do, and they are 150 florins more expensive. They do not get an armor upgrade. They do not cause fear or anything like that. They're just a really dependable shock infantry unit that will cut through heavily armored enemies. Now you can only take 2 of these before the red limit, unlike the Axemen of Lasarnik, which you can take 3 of before the red limit. And even though they don't get an armor upgrade, their native armor is still as good, if not better, than the Axemen of Lasarnik's armor fully upgraded. So these are a really solid unit, and I really felt like they were something Dol Amroth was missing in their army list amongst their infantry corps. So they've been added, and I highly recommend you use them. Next are the Iron Swan Siegebreakers. Now these guys were known as the Black Swan Renegades, 3rd Age Reforged. So a lot of the same stuff they had before. They can make a shield wall, they're effective against armor, good morale, good stamina. The main thing that changed for these guys is their attack stats went up by, I think, 2. I think it was 10 before. It was either 10 or 11. Their charge bonus stayed the same. And they act like a great shield unit, even though their shield isn't particularly large. They got a mass buff to the same as like the Blackguard of Barad-dûr. And that's, if I can figure out how to change the shield and enlarge it, I will. But until then, it's really just meant to reflect their general aggression. So what you want to do with these guys is you want to put them in shield wall and run them through pike lines or spear lines. Run them through enemy ranks. They'll knock them out of the way. Their attack stats are even better than the Iron Swan captains for the same cost. I would say these are really just a better unit than the Iron Swan captains all around. They may end up getting respec'd at some point so that their defensive skill is a little bit lower. Their shield is really high, and that's to reflect their sort of great shield status. But don't let these stats deceive you, though. They do die really quickly, just like the Blackguard of Barad-dûr or the Blackwatch Legion, the Angmar have. If you try to run them through a unit, they'll do some damage and they'll knock them down, but they die quickly doing that, so keep that in mind. Don't be afraid of these guys being too overpowered, is really what I'm trying to say there. And then probably the least of the three of the Iron Swan units, but still reliable, are the Iron Swan Guardians. Now these guys are basically just really, really dependable men-at-arms. They're kind of a halfway house between the Ethelon men-at-arms and the dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan. Their total defense is 30, which is amazing for one hit point unit. And it's equally wrapped up in all their defensive stats. Their attack is 10, which is really strong. And they can make shield wall. You really just get what's written on the box with these guys, though. There's nothing else really particularly about them that stands out. They don't have any morale buffs or debuffs or any kind of ability. Their mass is normal, and their cost is the same as the other two Iron Swan units. The one that's clearly the best of the three are the Siege Breakers, of course. But these are probably your best unit of men-at-arms once you've weighed everything equally. I would say they're probably your best men-at-arms unit. I think they can take an armor upgrade, but it doesn't come with an aesthetic change. Well, actually, in your version it might, but look to see that aesthetic change be taken away, because it just changes to the same appearance as the Iron Swan Siege Breakers. So, yeah, just bear that in mind. And I do recommend you take the Iron Swan Guardians. They're really good. And that's that row. We're almost done with Dol Amroth. We'll come down here, and we'll do the cavalry units that are new. Well, I say new, they're really just brought back from previous versions of Reforged. So these are the mounted version of the Iron Swan Captains, and they get a bonus fighting cavalry. Note that they do not have armor piercing, but their melee attack is higher by 3 points. They have the same charge bonus as the ones on foot, and that might end up changing, but likely not. These are meant to be your second best melee knights. So don't expect them to do a ton of damage on the charge, but if your micro management with cavalry isn't good, such as mine, to be frankly honest with you, this is kind of a unit you can depend upon. It's like a cavalry unit for dummies, really. Like, if you happen to leave them in combat, even against a unit with spears, they will stand up to it for a while, with really good melee stats, or defensive melee stats. Armor, defensive skill are really good. They don't have a shield, but they dish out a lot of damage, and they do have a bonus fighting cavalry. So, because of all these things, they are 1,000 florins. I think you get, I can't remember, you might get 2 of these before the red limit. But, keep in mind that you're spending 2,000 florins at that point, though. So, I'll leave that to you guys to judge whether taking more than one is worth it. I would say, if you're trying to do an all-cavalry army, I would say, yeah, take 2 of them. In fact, you might even want to take more than what the red limit will allow you, because they are so strong. And the reason why these cavalry options were added to Dol Amroth was to give Dol Amroth the option of fielding at least slightly more feasible all cavalry force. because that was kind of Dol Amroth's thing. Like, they had really good cavalry, but their units were so restricted that they couldn't really feasibly make a good cavalry force out of like the majority of their army. Cavalry force is what I mean. And their infantry was good, but they just kind of straddled that line where they weren't like experts at either. And so, and they ended up being kind of it really kind of defanged them as a faction. So we've really tried to make them a bit more, a bit better. And specifically, I've tried to make Dol Amroth a very aggressive faction. They're not going to be like Gondor, where they're going to be good at holding choke points. In fact, that's why the siege breakers were made, so that you could smash through a defensive choke point. So anyway, that's the Iron Swan captains. And then the Parathil Riders. This is just the mounted version of the Parathil Bogard. These guys existed before. The only thing that changed was that they get the same ammo as the Parathil Bogard. So it does area damage rather than doing damage to a single model. And it is the same fire-trained arrow ammunition. At least that's what it's called in the EDU files. Really, you just get what's on the box of these guys. There's nothing particularly great. They've got a decent melee attack. They don't have a bonus against cavalry, though, so keep that in mind. In melee, they're not going to have any help against other cavalry. But their melee stats are good enough, I think, that they can still go toe-to-toe with other cav, if need be. They can form the Cantabrian Circle. I've always had mixed luck with that. I don't know how useful it really is. Certainly it keeps your cavalry moving so that they don't have to, if you need to run them off, they don't start from they start from an already from a position where they're already moving, so there's no delay in executing a movement order. So I think that's really the only use for them, or for the shooting circle, I mean. Their cost stayed the same. Really, it's just the ammo type that they got, and the strength of the missile attack went up a little bit as well. So that's the Parathil Riders. Then there's the Tirthair Lancers. This is just a lesser version of the Knights of the Silver Swan. They do get a bonus fighting cavalry, though. That's kind of a theme you'll see in Dol Amroth's army, that their Lancers get a bonus fighting other cav, which is rare for most Lancer-type cavalry units. Of course, their lances are effective against armor, as you would expect. All the normal stuff for them. Their attack is kind of low. It's only slightly better than Gondor cavalry, in fact. They have a decent charge bonus, but again, pretty mediocre. Cost of 700, though, is what this is really what you're going after. Cheaper, reliable cavalry with a decent shield value, decent armor, and a decent defensive skill for a mid-tier Lancer unit. This is the cheapest cavalry unit you have, I think. Yeah, I think it is. So, if you're going to try to build a Dol Amroth army made of exclusively of cavalry, these guys are going to be kind of the backbone of that army. I don't remember if you get 2 or 3 of these before the red limit, though. I'd have to check on that. But use these guys along with their more powerful cousins and their more powerful counterparts in the Knights of the Silver Swan to crush enemy infantry positions and be able to put up a fight against other cavalry. So Dol Amroth is going to be a very strong cavalry nation, and my alternative expansion for Reforged. They're going to be very forgiving for people with not so great micromanagement as far as cavalry goes. And then finally, there's just 2 more units left. The Haven Guard, one of my favorite units in the game. There's no changes to their aesthetics. The only change really to them is their cost went up, by about 150 florins. They're still 2 hit points. They're effective against armor now is really the thing that's changed. That's the big change that was made to them. And their defensive skill went up a couple points as well. Their armor stayed the same. Their total defense of 30 is really good. For a unit that doesn't have a shield, it's really good. Their attack, I think, may have gone up a point or two. It could have stayed the same for all I know, though. I think it went up 1 point, maybe. It didn't go up very much if it did. The charge bonus is still the same. The unit size is the same. So the biggest things that changed were the defensive skill went up, I think, by a point. The attack may have gone up by a point, and they're now effective against armor. They still have all the morale abilities they had before, where they frighten, where they have a morale debuff for enemy units, and they have a morale buff for allied units. They're still locked morale. They are maybe now the best two-handed sword master unit in the game. The only units that may have something to say about that are Lyndon's two-handed sword master unit. They're General's Bodyguard tier sword master unit, I mean, and the Alendar of Amun-Sul that we'll see here in a little bit, and we get to Arthedain. But yeah, the Western Kingdoms of Men have had their two-handed sword master units reworked, as have every faction's two-handed sword master units, honestly. Yeah, we'll see that Mordor's have improved a bit. We'll see that Lyndon's has improved a bit. And I'm still working on the others, like the Nazkai and such. They're still being worked on. But yeah, so as of this moment right now, the Haven Guard are in the top 3 two-handed swordmaster units in the game for sure. And then finally we have the Wardens of Nimmerdale. Now this is a unit that was previously called the Wanderers of Nimmerdale. And at the time of recording this, Dol Amroth have no... they didn't have an elite archer unit in their roster. So I decided to turn their ranger unit into that. So given that they're now a warden unit instead of just a ranger unit, their recruitment cost went up significantly. It used to be, I think, 750 florins, so we've gone up by 450 in cost. But it's been, I would say it's probably been well worth that. I mean, you now have 2 hit points instead of 1. Your defensive skill went up substantially. It almost doubled, in fact. Maybe even more than doubled. Your armor went up, I think, I want to say by 2 points. 1 or 2 points. It didn't go down, for sure. Your swords, once you're out of ammo, are now wielded as two-handed swords. So your melee attack is significantly higher at 15. Your missile attack went up from, I want to say it was 5 to 10. Your ammo supply diminished, and your unit size diminished to a General's Bodyguard tier number, 60. But you can still hide anywhere, just like Rangers can. And the big showstopper party trick about these guys is they have the same ammo type as the Godhuli Meinauer do for Imladris. The Wardens of Elastirion also got that in London whenever we get to them. But the Wardens of Nimmerdale have that ammo type. That is armor piercing. I wouldn't worry too much about these guys breaking your army, though, because their ammo supply is capped, I think, at 10, which is pretty low, honestly. So, but a very good archer unit now. You really need to be taking these guys. In fact, There's generally a safe enough unit that you can put your general in them. I like to keep my general in them a lot, but if you're gonna put your general in your Haven Guard unit, I think that's also a good choice because then they can hide. Yeah. Now one of my favorite units in my expanded mod. So that's Dol Amroth. That was probably the longest of the 4 factions we're covering today. So go on to Gondor next here. Give me just a second. Alright. By the way, this is a brand new map that I made. That is part of the Alternative Reforged submod. So if you like the look of the map, I suggest you install the submod. It's a really fun map to play on. In fact, I'll have a couple replays coming here relatively soon. Games between Rusty and I playing on this. And we actually took 1 game apiece, so I think I did a reasonably good job putting this map together. Now, look for this to change. Unfortunately, it's a Silver Surfer. That's a pretty easy fix, though. I just need to go in and give Gondor the permission to use the texture for this model. But basically, I took the Dunedain Scouts from Arthedain and gave them to Gondor, and they will be a mounted version of the Athelian Rangers. All their stats are the same. The only big difference is that from before is that their bows are effective against armor, as are the normal Athelian Ranger units that we'll see here after a bit. But there's no high mass ammo type that they use. It's just normal Ranger ammo that's armor piercing. Given that their ammo is armor piercing, I think their ammo supply is reduced a little bit. But yeah, so you've got mounted Athelian Rangers at a really good price. So I highly suggest you take this unit if you're playing with Gondor. And yeah, as I said, I'll fix this and have that fix put up in the Discord for Alternative Reforged for you guys to get your hands on, because I hate playing with Silver Surfer units, and I apologize. That's my bad. So we'll move on to the new unit that Gondor got, the Clansmen of Lamedon. So this is a unit model I have taken from the Divide and Conquer mod, and I don't know if this is an original model by them or not. It could be that this was recycled from the original Third Age, and so it's just been ported into Alternative Reforged. In any case, if it is original, credit to them. They did a really good job. But credit to whoever did this, because I really like the look of this unit. They've got their cloaks that have the Tree of Gondor on the back, and they can receive. I think they can receive an armor upgrade at the moment. I think it's just 1, but there's no aesthetic change to it. So let's take a look at their stats. So you get a really good number of them in their unit for a good price. Essentially, these guys were statted out using Gondor infantry as a template. Really what I was trying to do when I created these guys for this mod is I wanted to make them aggressive and able to do a lot of damage, but not as survivable as Gondor infantry would be. So their defensive skill is lower, their armor's lower, their shield is a bit lower, but they have the same attack, the same charge, and their armor piercing. And to make up for their lower armor stats, defensive stats, relative to Gondor infantry, they can hide anywhere, unlike Gondor infantry can. They have impetuous morale, so they may charge without orders, so that really just means... That doesn't mean they're just going to run off without having been given orders to. It just means that if they are charged by a unit, they won't just let the enemy get their charge bonus off. they will countercharge once they're close enough to use their charge bonus. So I actually like it when you have units that may charge without orders, because it's not really what it sounds like. Other than that, let's see. Oh, they move really fast too. That's the other thing about them. They're very quick. They're similar to Dunlending Veterans, but I think that if you were to put them up in a fight against them, the Lamberting Clansmen may come out on top. I'd have to check that, but I think there's one or two stats in the Clansmen that are just a tad bit higher, and for only a little bit more in cost. They cost about the same as your Gondor infantry, so why not take them? I think you can take, I want to say you can take 3 or 4 of these guys before the red limit. Really good choice. I highly recommend them if you're playing with Gondor. So actually, let's come back here. We'll come back to them in a minute. I want to show you guys the Knights of the White Tree. This is just Mithrandir's retinue from normal Reforged, but in fact, I think their stats are pretty much all the same. I think their stats are pretty much all the same. The only difference is the name change. And look for a model change on the mount at some point in the future. I'm going to try to find a Gondorian mount model that is barded, because I think that the best cavalry unit that the faction of Gondor have should be represented with a good mount type. So keep that in mind. Yeah, otherwise they have the same exact stats as the Mithrandir's retinue in vanilla Reforged, just with a name that's less associated with the character. So that's them. And then we'll move on to the front row here. So the last 3 units that were changed were the Pelargir Marines. The Wardens of the White Tower have a new name and are completely respect. And then I've brought back the Vanguard of King Elisar. So we'll start with the Marines. The Pelargir Marines have the same changes that the Belfalas Marines had. Armor-piercing javelins, bonus fighting cavalry is to expect from a javelin-throwing unit. But once they're out of ammo, they too pull out an axe that is armor-piercing. And they have good defensive stats that I think may have been slightly improved for the same cost. So really tried to make Marine units of this caliber a little bit better and a little bit more worth taking, I think. Because it was generally the case that once they ran out of ammo with their javelins in vanilla Third Age, Third Age Reforged, that they would just they couldn't really do as well as normal. They couldn't really do the job in melee that a normal unit of men-at-arms couldn't do. So I wanted to change that to give the Kingdoms of Men a little bit more oomph in their main line-holding units. But to make up for that, I took away body piercing from their javelins, just like I did from the Belfalas Marines. So keep that in mind. I think they're a good unit. I do suggest you use them. The Sons of Icthalion. You guys would know these from vanilla Third Age Reforged as the Wardens of the White Tower. And you'll note they are significantly reduced in cost. They were stupidly, grossly overcosted for what they did. They've gone down by 300 florins. They've kept the same. They're still 2 hit points. They can still make shield wall. I think their total defensive stats have gone up significantly. I mean, 37 defense is really good. Their attack stats have improved a bit, I think. They're comparable to the Dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan, and that was done intentionally. The other big change about these guys is that, like Dol Amroth's Dismounted Silver Swan Knights, you can take 2 of them before the red limit. So this is your most dependable sword and board unit as Gondor. Yeah, I think that's really all there is to say about them. Highly recommend them. They are much, much better, and they got a really cool name change, in my opinion. Yeah, let me know, guys, in the comments what you think of my name changes. If it's an improvement, if it's just kind of a meh sort of thing, or if you don't like it. Trying to come up with a little bit more creative names for some of the units. But yeah, this unit is much, much more worth taking than it was in vanilla 3rd Age Reforged. So do take these guys. And finally, for Gondor, the Vanguard of King Elisar. So these guys are probably in the top 5 two-handed swordmaster units in the game. Gondor were constructed with respect to the faction so that their two-handed swordmaster units were kind of middle of the road with regards to the Western Kingdoms of Men. Better than Cardolan, but not as good as Dol Amroth or especially Arthedain. But they're really good nonetheless. They are locked morale. They're 100 florins cheaper than Haven Guard, so that's also a plus. They have 2 hit points. They have a better defensive skill than the Haven Guard, and that's kind of their selling point. Their attack is only 1 less than the Haven Guards, with the same charge bonus and the same unit size. The big thing, though, is that they're lacking is they trade in the, relative to the Haven Guard, they give up armor piercing for 5 points more in defensive skill. These guys, that's their strongest suit. They are very hard to kill in melee, unless if you've got something like Haven Guard or like one of Mordor's Black Numenorian units, or the Nazkai, say. Just for reference, the Nazgul have a defensive skill of, I believe, 25 now. But it could be as low as 23, so they're very, very high skilled. I think they may even have a higher skill. It's at least equal to, if not higher than, the what are they, the Noldor Blade Masters or whatever they're called that Lyndon have. I can never remember their name. Yeah, these guys are hard to they'll survive a long time in a melee fight. They won't kill quite as quickly as some of their other peers will, but very good unit of sword masters. I do recommend you take them. Gondor really got good changes. They're even more dependable than they were before, but note that they didn't get any buffs regarding their polearm units, and that was done deliberately. I think they're already plenty good in that regard. Okay, so we'll do Arthedain next, and then Cardolan last, because Cardolan only have 3 units. So Arthedain have quite a few units here, kind of like Dol Amroth did. And we'll start with the Dunedain Peacekeepers. The only thing that changed about these guys is they are now armor piercing. And because they're armor piercing, their cost went up by 150 florins. So they're now 900 apiece. They still get an armor upgrade, which they have here with the aesthetic change. They still have the same shield value and other defensive stats. Really, it's just, and their attack is the same. Charge bonus is the same. They will bring down trolls a little bit easier, though, because they've got armor piercing. I really felt like the total lack of armor piercing with Arthedain was just a little bit... It could be a little bit too much to have to try to compensate for, so I gave them... They still have a pretty noticeable lack in armor piercing units, particularly in melee. In fact, we'll see that they have 3 total. If you're only looking at infantry, we'll see that they only have 3 total units that actually have an armor piercing melee attack, and this is one of them. So I really like the Dunedain Peacekeepers. You can still take 2 before the red limit. Do take these guys. They'll do good work for you. So the AI is kind of mushed a bunch of units together, so I apologize about that. But we'll take a look at the Arthedain Men-at-Arms. The thing that changed here is that these guys actually got a little bit worse. Arthedain, the meta in this mod and this alternative Reforged expansion is that for Arthedain is that they still have a relative lack of armor piercing, and their entry-level units, so their low-tier and mid-tier units are weaker than all the other Western Kingdoms of Men. And they depend, kind of like the dwarves, much more on their elite hero units. Their other big strength is in their... so their biggest strengths are in their armor, although that's not exemplified in their men-at-arms. But their armor relative to all the other factions in the game, and their the large number of good, dependable swordmaster units they can field. So the Arthedain Men-at-Arms, honestly, with the changes made to them, I don't know if I recommend them at this point. They don't come in the numbers needed to justify the decrease in their stats relative to their cost. So, keep those things in mind. They're not horrible, but relative to vanilla Third Age Reforged, they're not as good as they were. The same is true of the Evendom Spears. Their melee stats went down with no change in their cost. Again, this is to encourage players to field more of Arthedain's newer elite infantry units. But they'll still hold the line relatively well. They can still do shield wall. They still get their same bonus fighting cavalry. They have reasonably good morale and stamina. And actually they have impetuous morale, it looks like. But keep in mind, they still get the same aesthetic change with an armor upgrade. But just keep those things in mind. And we'll see the same theme run true with the Arthedain Pikemen. Their melee stats went down as well, that being in their skill. I think it was like 3 or 4 before. Their armor went down by a point, I believe, and they stayed the same cost. So Arthedain's pikes are weaker than they were before. The Numinos Gate Guards didn't change at all, though, so I didn't include them in this roster review. So the same thing is true of the pikemen that was true of the men-at-arms and the Evendom units. In fact, this is that's not the Rangers. I wonder if there must be a Ranger unit in there somewhere. Dunedain Captains. So Carolyn lost the Dunedain Captains to Arthedain, and they are exactly the same as they were before. They have a really good defense. They've got a good attack and charge bonus for 1,200 florins. I take that back. I think their stats did increase a little bit, but their cost went up, and you can still take 2 of them. All their abilities are the same. I'd have to check the stats on them relative to vanilla Third Age Reforged, because they may be the same. But you can still take an armor upgrade with the corresponding aesthetic change, and this is one of the examples of Arthedain being able to take a lot of two-handed sword masters. So we've now looked at one of them. I don't know what the AI did with the Dunedain Rangers, but we'll see them with Carolyn. So we'll talk about them when we get to Carolyn, but know that Arthedain can take Dunedain Rangers as well. They just don't have the mounted version in the Dunedain Scouts. The Evendom archers, again, the same is true of them that was true of the Evendom spearmen and the other entry-level infantry units. Their missile attack stayed the same as 4, but at 4, and I'd like that to be the same in my alternative Reforged submod, because I do like that there's kind of like a floor level, a guaranteed level of damage that an arrow can do across the board. So their missile attack stayed the same. Where they took hits, where in their shield is down to 2. I believe it may have been 3 before. Their defensive skills down to 3, where again I believe it was 4 before. And their melee attack I know went down by 1. Their charge bonus I believe went down by 1 as well. So they're weaker in melee than they were before. They can't take quite as much damage with their shield being weaker. And they maintain the same cost. Note that they still get an armor upgrade with the associated aesthetic change here. I still think that they're probably worth 450 florins, though, to be honest with you. While their armor's only 4 with an upgrade, so that's pretty weak. That being said, though, you still get a good number of them with decent accuracy, decent range, and a pretty average missile attack. So, and 450 florins is still pretty cheap. So I do think they're worth it. I mean, if you remember, the Belfalas archers were, I think, 100 florins more, and they weren't that much better. So you might still consider taking Evendom archers. Still 2 before the red limit with them, but they're not going to stand up to damage quite as well as they did before. Arthedain marksmen, same theme as the Evendom archers, although their melee attack and their melee stats overall are much better. Their armor's a lot better, but they don't get a shield, so keep that in mind. They're cheap for marksmen, but they pay for it with the missile damage of only 4. So keep those things in mind. They can use sharpened stakes, which is nice. Honestly, though, they're probably one of the weaker. They're probably the weakest marksman unit of the Western Kingdoms of Men. They're only slightly, well, I say that. Marksman unit, yes. They are definitely the weakest marksman unit in the Western Kingdoms of Men. Your marksmen are essentially the equivalent of Gondor, Dol Amroth, and Cardolin's basic tier archer unit. You were slightly better than a militia archer with your marksman, but you're basically at a basic tier. In the future, I will probably add another unit of archers that will supplant these guys as being marksmen, and these guys will become your new basic tier of archers. So, but for now, they're your marksmen, and they're the best you're going to get for the moment. They can still play stakes, so that's nice, and they're still relatively cheap, cheaper than most of the others. But you can still only take 2 for the red limit. Let's keep that in mind. We'll do the Sword Masters. Actually, let's do these guys first back here. The Avenging Sons of Arnor. This is another unit model borrowed from Divide and Conquer. So these guys used to have, in previous iterations, a shield and spear. The Divide and Conquer team gave them a 2-handed sword instead, and I really like the look of them. I think they'd look a little bit better if they had a cloak, so if in future, if I figure out how to do any kind of modeling work, I'll try to give them a cloak. But yeah, they're called the Avenging Sons of Arnor. And think of these guys as kind of being almost like a halfway, they're halfway between your normal 2-handed Swordmaster units and your Uber tier 2-handed Swordmaster units. They don't have the attack or the charge bonus of either one of those types of units. They're kind of somewhere in the middle. So I would say they have the attack stats of a basic two-handed Swordmaster unit, but the defensive stats of a Uber tier Swordmaster unit. And they have a recruitment cost of 900, but their real party trick is that they are effective against armor. So that's one of the key units that Arthedain have that will do armor-piercing melee damage. But because of that, because of how good these are, they are only available once before the red limit. So bear that in mind. They will be shredded by armor-piercing arrows of any kind, just like a lot of, or just like the Dunedain captains back there. But they're even more prone to it, so bear that in mind. You still have the dismounted Fornoster Rain Knights, but they didn't receive any changes in this submod expansion, so I didn't include them. So that would make your third two-handed Swordmaster unit. And then we'll move on to the Elenjar of Amansul. Now, those of you keeping track at home will recognize these as being the Pharism Swordmasters from Numenor. Numenor are still technically in this mod expansion, but they are on their way out the door. I don't like that Numenor is included in a Third Age mod, given that the island of Numenor and nation of Numenor didn't even exist long enough to see the end of the Second Age. So they will be shown to the door and replaced, hopefully, once I figure out how to add new factions, they will be replaced with a Rovanian faction, and after that, a Dwarves of Eredluin faction. So that will hopefully be coming in the next version, in the next full version released. But these guys are monsters. As I said before, they're probably in the top 3 with the Haven Guard as being one of the best two-handed Swordmaster units in the game. So have a look at them. The recruitment cost is 1,500, but their defense is outstanding. They have really high defensive skill, only surpassed by the Vanguard of King Elisar, and Melkor's Black Cardinals that Mordor have, which the translation to normal Reforged, the Melkor's Black Cardinals, whenever we get to Mordor's Changelog faction overview, they were previously known as the Temple Executioners. But we'll set Mordor aside for now and go back to these guys. Their unit size is a little bit higher, and that's because I've forgotten to take out the Numenorian officer models, so you have a couple silver surfers there, and again, that's my bad, my apologies. I thought I had added Arthedain's officers to their unit, but apparently not. The big thing about these guys is that they have a high defensive skill. They do not have armor piercing, but they have a shield, and a halfway decent one at that. So they will stand up to armor-piercing arrow fire better than pretty much any two-handed Swordmaster unit in the game. And so just them having a shield and a slightly higher than average defensive skill stat, even with their slightly below average attack stats, they're so tanky and enduring in melee combat that they are probably in the top 3 uber tier Swordmaster units in the game. So definitely recommend you take these guys. This makes number 4 of your two-handed Swordmasters. And I did not include the Wardens of the North because they didn't receive any changes. But if you want to include them as well, they're really a hybrid unit between an elite archer and an elite swordmaster unit. But you would then have 5 total units with two-handed swords as Arthedain, and so that you can really put out a lot of damage, even if not all of it is armor piercing. You're going to have excellent swordsmen as Arthedain. That's one of your key strengths. You have a very large and diverse roster, and excellent sword masters. What else was there? I think there's only one more unit we need to cover for Arthedain, and that is the Steel Men of Amonsul. Here again, you may recognize these guys as being the Romena Marksmen, I believe is what they were called in 3rd Age Reforged, something like that. They are steel bowmen, so they have effective against armor arrows. And then they turn into very reliable, in fact, above average men-at-arms when they're done with their ammunition. I believe you can take 2 of these guys for a recruitment cost of 900 before the red limit. You have a melee attack of 8, same with a missile attack of 8. For reference, that's the same as the Parathil Bogard and the Lukinarim. That's also the same as some of the crossbow units that we'll see in the game in other faction overviews as well. So really good archers. Their limitation, though, is that they only have 5 arrows each. I think their ammo supply is 5, so it's really low. And the purpose is really to... I wanted them to be more men-at-arms than they are archers. So they pull out these really good shields, and they have a shield value that's... they only have a shield value of 4, so look for that to change in future editions, future versions. That'll probably double, in fact. I thought it was higher than that. In fact, it could be higher than that, and I just forgot to update the text file. But even with that, they have an armor value of 10, which is amazing. A really good defensive skill. They will beat almost anyone... almost any type of like men-at-arms or sword infantry unit. Their big claim to fame is being a hybrid unit that turns into an excellent sword and board unit when they're done. So definitely take these guys. In fact, I would say take these guys over the Arthedain men-at-arms, unless if you're desperate and just looking to pad out your line. I think these guys are worth every last florin that they're charged, even if you feel it's a little expensive. Trust me, you'll get results with them. I think you can take, as I said, I think you can take 2 before the red limit. So that's Arthedain, and we're almost done, guys. Bear with me here. We just have Carlin to do, and there are only 3 or 4 units with them. So we have the Dunedain Rangers, which they were already in Carlin's roster. Their costs stayed the same. Their defensive stats may have increased, and their defensive skill, I believe, went up a little bit. Their melee attack stats are the same, really high for just a basic ranger unit. They're not a warden unit like the wardens of Nimrodel are. They only have 1 hit point. But they can hide anywhere. They do not have armor-piercing arrows like many other rangers do, like the Athelian Rangers do, for example. But I think their arrows in version 1.0 are a high mass. It's either high mass, like a black arrow, that will knock unit models down and disrupt them, and kind of stun lock them in place. They have really high missile attack, though. It's either that or it is an elite poison arrow, I believe. We'll run the we'll hand all these units over to the AI here in a little bit, and we'll check. Yeah, so their missile stats went up, and they got a slightly improved melee defensive stats. And their ammo supply decreased, I believe, by a little bit. I think they're kind of in the same category as like the Athelian Rangers, where they're in somewhere in the ballpark of 15 arrows per man. So Dunedain Rangers, that's basically the gist of them. Remember that Arthedain can take them as well. That may change in future versions if Arthedain get new units to replace them. But for the moment, both Cardolan and Arthedain share that unit. We'll move to the new unit from the unit models from Divide and Conquer. Now this looks like, at first glance, it looks like these are Silver Surfers, but they're actually not. You can see that there's kind of like they just have this weird sheen about them. I don't know what it is with this model. I've given them an armor upgrade, so maybe there's an aesthetic change, but I don't think there is. But these are the Minotaur Roman Barons. All the Minotaur Roman units are elite units, but they only have 1 hit point. They make up for that in excellent armor. Armor value 14 is better than units like Haven Guard and the Elendar and other such units. For a unwieldy weapon, they have a really good defensive skill, and they have a really high attack at 25 with a really high charge bonus. They have an uber tier unit size and cost, but they are kind of a halfway house in that they're only 1 hit point. So these guys will be devastated by armor-piercing projectiles, and they will go down in extended melee pretty quickly. They really depend on their armor and their really high damage. So put it this way, there's a really good chance they will not survive the battle, even if you win, unless if it's just a landslide in your favor. But if it's a relatively close battle, assuming that, even if you win, they will probably be dead by the end, but they will have racked up a good kill count for you. They don't have any abilities, really, and like Cardolan, in keeping with their main weakness, they have, it says they have excellent morale, but really it's not as high as that would suggest. They are prone to morale shocks, so keep that in mind. You only get 1 of them. So they're basically a lesser version of the Tharbad Warhammers. So that's the Minotaur Roman Barons. This unit model was also taken from the game files of Divide and Conquer. So credit to them for having created this. I really like the pole hammers. They look really cool. So yeah, that's the Minotaur Roman Barons. 2 more units, guys. The next one's the Minotaur Roman Swordmasters. They were known as the Mercenary War Chiefs. They're only available to Cardolan. Their attack stats are really high, actually, for a 2-handed Swordmaster unit. That's not 2 hit points. See, Cardolan's Minotaur Roman units kind of occupy a weird middle ground between, okay, we're an elite unit, but not a general's tier elite unit. Arthedain had that in their Avenging Sons of Arnor as well, so that's kind of the space these units occupy. You get 2 of these before the red limit, just like you did with the Mercenary War Chiefs. In order to get these guys, by the way, you have to set the game era to specials for some reason. I'll try to fix that in the next version, but you do have them. And their recruitment cost is now 900 florins. So they have a really good defensive skill, but they're pretty average, maybe even below average armor. But their real claim to fame is their really high attack and charge with a little bit of a shield. So that's the Minotaur Roman Swordmasters, and they are the only 2-handed Swordmaster unit you have as Cardolan, the only one you're ever going to get. unless if I find something that looks really cool. So that's them. And finally, the last unit we'll be showing are the Hearthguard of Amansul. Excuse me. So this unit, their abilities are pretty much unchanged from vanilla 3rd Age Reforged, as is their melee attack, and their defensive stats, be it armor, shield, and defensive skill. I believe that's the case with those anyway. Their shield may have gone up a little bit. I don't remember for sure, though. The things that changed are they are, frankly, just a lot better. Mostly, and that's mostly due to the changes in their arrow that they fire. They fire a high-mass black arrow that is armor-piercing. And so, given that, they are limited in their ammo supply. I don't remember the number offhand. I want to say it's in the range of 10, though. Somewhere between 10 and 15. Their melee attack is not armor-piercing. I think that would make them a little bit too strong, but I mean, maybe I'll look at that in future editions. I doubt it, though. I want to say their range may have increased a tiny bit, too, by maybe like 10 meters. So where before it was like 190 or something, it's now 200, something like that. Really, these guys are comparable to a Warden unit. It's like the Wardens of Minas Ithil, or that sort of thing. So that's these guys. I really like to put my general's bodyguard, or my general on these guys, because they're really survivable. They do really good damage at range. And given those things, their recruitment cost went up, I think, by about 200 florins. So they are significantly better than they were. And that's it. That's the 4 Western Kingdoms of Men in a nutshell. So we will put everyone under control of AI, and we will play this out. Alright, so we'll fast forward just so we can see a couple things here. And then this way we can get a good look at the map as well. I have no idea what on earth AI is doing with my men, but let's take a look here. So let's slow down. We can take a look at the arrows that the Parathel riders are firing, wherever they are. So yeah, as you can see, this is the fire-trained arrows, and rather than shoot the unit that's right next to them, they're firing up and up. This is the AI of Medieval 2, folks. It's pretty abysmal. Let's see if we can see what the Dunedain Rangers are doing. See what kind of ammo they are firing, if any. Or what is the AI doing? Well, we might not get to see it. I'm pretty sure they fire a poison arrow, though. Though it could be a high-mass black arrow as well. Don't hold me to that. So that's the... Yeah, it's still the Parathel Riders firing. I don't know why the AI is not using the Parathel Bowguard or any of my other ranged units on these guys. But yeah, these Snaga would get shredded by Bowguard. So yeah, anyway, that's everything. So thanks, guys. We'll catch you later.